In this video, we are going to discuss the last round of the FIDE Candidates Chess Tournament 2024. And today we are going to discuss the game played between Hikaru Nakamura versus Gukesh. So first of all, Gukesh is leading the tournament with half a point. So basically, if Gukesh wins that game, he's going to be the candidate who is going to fight against Ding Liren for the World Championship title. Whereas, in the second place, we are having three candidates who are Hikaru Nakamura, Caruana Fabiano, and Ian Nepomniachtchi. So basically, in a very complex game, Caruana Fabiano and Ian Nepomniachtchi, the game has been drawn. So this game is going to decide who is going to be the candidate to challenge the world champion, the Ding Liren. So I don't want to waste any further time, but before starting the video, still 93% of the viewers have not yet subscribed to the channel. So if you're not yet a subscriber, make sure to subscribe the channel because it's free for you, but it helps us to make more videos like this. So Hikaru Nakamura is playing with the white pieces and he starts the game with 1 d4. d5 by Gukesh. So first of all, the flexible move is to play the move knight to f6, but nothing wrong with d5. c4, and the main idea of playing the move d5 is to play the move d into c4. The queen's gambit accepted. So after d into c4, white plays the move knight to f3. So like other common moves are something like e3, but the main issue of playing the move e3 at the place of knight to f3 here is, if you try to play the move e3, black is having this additional option of pushing the pawn to e5, because now the knight is no longer on f3 to cover the e5 square, and after e5, like if white, for example, takes the pawn with the bishop, black captures the pawn, takes, and here after bishop d6, black can play knight f6 short castle, and white is already having an IQP, the isolated queen pawn, and black is already very comfortable. So going back, that's exactly why if white tries to capture the pawn with the pawn on e5, black can already trade off the queen, knight to c6, takes, and already this position is quite good for black because first of all, white has lost his castling rights, the king is still in the center, black is having the queenside majority, and black is very comfortable. So that's the main reason to stop e5, first playing knight f3, knight f6, and now playing the move e3. e6, and now we have bishop into pawn, and now we have the move bishop to e7. So there are other candidate moves as well, something like a6, c5 is also possible. That eventually happens in the game. If you try to play something like c5, because after bishop e7 you still have to play c5. So you can also play c5. The point here is after c5, short castle, a6, b3, b5, bishop e2, bishop b7, bishop to b2, knight g7, knight to d2, bishop e7. Basically, white is not going to capture the pawn on c5. So basically, you kind of have to develop the bishop on e7 sooner or later. So that's the whole point. Gukesh, first, before playing the move c5, he first played the move bishop to e7, keeping the options of short castling open because there could be any time that Gukesh want to do a short castle. But if the bishop remains on f8, it could cause a big potential problem. So that's the reason bishop e7 is the move, knight to c3, and now Gukesh played the move c5, opening up the center. And here, like, white is already having many options. White can play the move a3, dc5, even short castle. In the game, we have the move a3. If first of all, white decides to go for capturing the pawn, black can already trade the queens, bishop c5, and black is already pretty happy. If white decides to do a short castle, which makes kind of the maximum logic, black also short castle, queen e2, because it's the main idea. The idea is to play the move rook d1, but here black can already capture the pawn, and after knight takes, e5, and basically taking this knight followed by knight c6, and black is already very comfortable because the bishop is already open. So black is already very comfortable. So that's the main idea. Hikaru first played the move a3, short castle, and now Gukesh played a very nice move a6. Because this is the main idea. Black's idea is generally to play the move b5, bishop b7, and black is pretty comfortable. So after e6, we have the move queen to e2 by Hikaru Nakamura. If he goes for capturing the pawn, black can already trade out the queen, bishop takes, and after b4, bishop e7, bishop b2, b5. Black can also develop the bishop, and the position is kind of even. Definitely, white has developed the rook, but it doesn't make any sense because knight c6, rook g8, and black is still having no real issues in the position. So dc5 is not really working, so we have to move queen e2, b5, and here after bishop a2, Gukesh decided to capture on the pawn on d4. So during the live stream, Magnus Carlsen himself said that He personally didn't like the move CD4, but here Gukesh was having some extraordinary plan up on his sleeve. After CG4, we have the move E into D4, because if you try to go for something like Rook D1, because you can't really capture the knight or the pawn because the queen is hanging, black can simply play the move B4, which is very interesting. Takes, and here at the place of capturing the pawn with the bishop, black first develops the knight. The whole idea is to capture the pawn with the knight, followed by putting the knight to d5, and black is pretty happy. So for example, after knight takes, we have queen c7, b5, takes, pawn takes, and here black is already a pawn down, but in exchange, after queen c6, simply bishop a6 is coming up, pinning up this knight, and black is having just too much compensation for the lost pawn. Rook b8 is coming up, and black is just too much comfortable to play in this position with the black pieces. So that's the main reason Rook d1 is not the best. ed4, and here still b4 by Gukesh, a very interesting idea. After b4, basically if you try to capture the pawn, black is going to still play the move knight c6, not capturing the pawn with the bishop, knight c6, and the main idea is to capture the pawn and put the knight to d5. So here, if b5, takes, knight to b4. And still the idea remains the same, bishop a6, and also putting pressure on the bishop on a2. Bishop a6, and black is already having too much compensation for the lost pawn. So that's the reason Hikaru personally didn't like the move, and he went for the move knight to e4. Now his idea is to put the knight to c5. For example, if Gukesh plays something move like bishop b7, knight c5, takes, because the bishop was simply hanging on b7. So takes, because white is going to capture the pawn now. So takes, and here white can actually play the move b4. And here white is having maximum space on the queen side, and the c5 pawn can really pose some real threats in the future, because the a3 pawn is anyway going to collapse. White is having a good pawn structure, and this can lead to a big problem to white in the future. So that is the reason, before playing bishop b7, Gukesh first decided to capture on a3. Takes, and now he played the move bishop b7, because if you try to play knight c5 in this position, black can happily trade off the knight to g7. The pawn is going to collapse, because now the pawn is no longer on b4. The pawn structure is pretty bad. The c5 pawn is going to collapse in the future, and black is pretty happy. So that's the whole idea. Hikaru took back the knight to c3, knight to d5, and now we have the move bishop to d2. If you try to trade off the pieces, it will only benefit black, because now black can just play this position forever, because white is having just a loose pawn on d4, the isolated queen pawn, and black is pretty happy. So bishop to d2, and here Gukesh simply traded off one pair of knight d7, developing the final piece into the game. Rook to c8, attacking the bishop, knight to f6, and now simply trade off the knight for the bishop. So it looks like many chess players would like to hesitate to give the strong bishop for a weak knight. But the problem here is, basically Gukesh simply converted the advantage from this to a pawn advantage, to a material advantage. And here black is simply a pawn up, though indeed white is having the bishop pair, but nothing much is happening, because black is having absolutely no weakness in this particular position. You can't really capture the a6 pawn, because the bishop is already hanging and black would be winning. So we have the move rook d1, and here simply queen f4, defending the pawn, queen to b7, and here Gukesh played a very interesting move, bishop to c5. What's the idea? First of all, the bishop was hanging, so you have to move the bishop c5. And the point here is, you can't really capture the a6 pawn, because black can already play queen h4. And after queen h4, the idea is to simply take on f2. So you're gonna have to play g3, because knight g4 is also coming up. So g3, and already queen h3. And it's still winning, because knight g4 is still coming up. So for example, if you play something like bishop e1, defending the f2 pawn, still knight g4, h2 is collapsing and the game is over. So going back, if you try to play something like bishop f1, trying to attack the queen, here black's already having a very strong move, simply sacrificing the bishop. Takes, queen takes, knight check, takes, and it's eventually a lost position for white. So going back, that's the reason queen into a6, simply a blunder. So we have the move bishop to e1 first, protecting the f2 pawn, a5, queen to b5 by Hikaru Nakamura. After queen to b5, Gukesh can already take the advantage by playing the move queen to f4, keeping the maximum pressure on the white pieces. Knight g4 is coming up, threatening to take on f2 and also threatening to mate on h2. But at the place of going for this complicated scenario, Gukesh simply decided to trade off the queens, which I would say in practical terms it's a good idea as he's already leading the tournament by half a point. Bishop b5, bishop to b6, defending the a5 pawn in the position. And now the position is pretty much even because like the position has been simply simplified and there are no potential weaknesses for either of the side of the player, and the position is a drawish position. So rook c1, knight to d5, centralizing the knight, king f1, rook d8, king f8. Both the sides decide to bring their pieces into the game, trying to centralize their king. f5, rook to c4, trading up a pair of rook, knight b4, rook to b8, rook to b1. Obviously, if you try to capture the knight in the position, it's an opposite color bishop and it's eventually a draw. So that's why we have rook b1, bishop c5, rook c1, knight c6, and bishop c3, simply expanding on g5, bishop b5, and here bishop a3. Black can already play bishop and knight to d4 check, trading off, and here having a opposite color bishop. It's still a draw, but at the place of going for this, bishop a3, knight d4 check, and we still have the same position, check, and here material wise it's an even position, but an opposite color bishop, so it's most likely to be end in a draw. Bishop to b4, bishop to d3, e5, push, takes, bishop e7, takes, rook here. A couple of moves were played by both the players, takes, and here it's just a matter of time. Rook a2, check. Like Hikaru can repeat the position, but we have this, king e2, and here bishop to d2. So the pawn is also falling at the same time. The bishop is also falling on h5. So here Hikaru simply pushed the pawn, and here rook f5, and eventually made a queen, where Gukesh simply traded off the rook for the pawn, e3. And it looks like all those who don't know, this position is the draw position, because to checkmate a black king, you must need the coordination of the rook and the king to first of all kick the king at the corner and try to mate it, but you are not having that much time because, for example, after e3, for example, let's take like any move. Let's take over here, check. The point here is the moment the king runs away, black can simply push the pawn, and now you can't really stop it. Here, check, and here you have to give up this. It's eventually a draw. White can't really make any progress. So after e3, we have a couple of moves, and eventually Hikaru Nakamura decided to give up the rook for the bishop and the pawn. And on the 71th move, both the players agreed to a draw, which made Gukesh the next challenger to fight Ding Liren for the World Championship title. And Gukesh is surprisingly the second Indian to play the candidates as well as winning the candidates after Vishwanathan Anand. So a lot of drama out of 14 rounds, but after the 14 rounds, we have a champion, Gukesh Domaraju from India. So this game was simply brilliant, played by Gukesh. I would say the most interesting part that I personally liked in this particular game is the moment when Gukesh went for the move b4. Simply a mind-blowing move, a very interesting idea that many of the players can really you guys can just analyze this idea and can really play this position on your board in your games. So a very interesting games, and if you learned anything new in this particular video, make sure to like the video, share this video with everyone, and make sure to subscribe to our channel if you are new to our channel. I'm going to come up with these interesting videos like this because in the next year we are going to see some exciting battles for the World Championship match against Ding Liren versus Gukesh. So yeah, till then stay tuned and keep watching OneShot Chess.